The first time America realized Don the Snake Prudhomme wasn't just another drag racer, but a different species entirely, was the night he climbed into a funny car that no human being had any right to control and proved, in front of thousands, why the title The Snake wasn't a nickname, it was a warning. Everyone had heard the stories by then, the reflexes, the cold eyes, the way he could sit perfectly still inside a car filled with fire, shaking like a living bomb, waiting for the lights to fall. But nothing, not the photos, not the rumors, not the whispered pit lane legends, prepared anyone for what he actually did that night. They said the Snake was ruthless. They said he was fearless. They said he didn't race other men, he dismantled them. And they were right. But that night was different. That night was the moment drag racing changed forever. The moment Don Prudhomme went from talented driver to terrifying myth. And the crazy part? It didn't start with a win. It started with something nobody in the stands understood. A mistake. At least, that's what they thought it was. The lights came down, bam, 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 and Snake launched so violently that even veteran crew guys flinched. Flames exploded from the headers. The car twisted so hard off the line it looked like it was trying to leap through the guardrail. Any normal driver would have lifted. Any sane driver would have bailed out. But the Snake wasn't normal. And sanity was never part of his job description. Instead of lifting, he shoved the pedal deeper, forcing the car straight with nothing but instinct, violence, and a level of focus that bordered on supernatural. People in the stands stood up. They weren't cheering, they were shocked, scared even, because what they saw wasn't bravery. It was something colder, something sharper, something almost inhuman. And that was the moment older racers still talk about today, because right there, inside that nitro-soaked chaos, one truth became impossible to deny. Don Prudhomme wasn't just racing. He was rewriting what it meant to race. But here's what fans in the stands didn't know, not yet. That run wasn't luck, it wasn't talent, it wasn't even courage. It was the result of something that had started decades earlier in a dusty California workshop, where a skinny kid with bad skin and sharper eyes than anyone else in the room discovered one simple fact. He didn't need money. He didn't need backing. He didn't even need a proper crew. He needed one thing: speed. Real speed. The kind of speed that burned reputations to the ground and rebuilt them in fire. The kind of speed that scared the veterans and silenced the loudmouths. The kind of speed that made a quiet kid from the West Coast into the most feared racer alive. And the rivalry that would one day turn him into a legend, one that newspapers would call the rivalry that saved drag racing itself, was already forming in the shadows. Because somewhere else, watching Snake's rise, was a man with the opposite personality, the opposite attitude, and the exact same hunger. A man named Tom, the Mongoose McEwen, the promoter, the talker, the showman, the guy who turned races into events and rivalries into headlines. The one driver Snake could beat on the track, but never outrun in the public eye. Together, they would change drag racing forever. But back on that night, the night the Snake became the Snake, none of that had happened yet. All the fans saw was a kid controlling something uncontrollable. All the veterans saw was a driver who didn't fear the car. All Snake saw was the future, his future. And when he stepped out of the cockpit, calm, quiet, unfazed, as if he'd just driven to the grocery store, one old racer turned to another and said the line that would follow Don Prudhomme for the rest of his life. "Boys, that ain't a man out there. That's a damn reptile." And they were right. The Snake had arrived, and drag racing would never be the same. Long before Don the Snake, Prudhomme became the cold-eyed assassin of the drag strip. Long before magazines plastered his face across every newsstand in America. Long before match race promoters begged for him because crowds doubled whenever his trailer rolled through the gate. There was a moment, one single moment, that should have ended his career before it ever started. A moment where any normal racer would have backed away from drag racing forever. But the Snake wasn't normal, and what happened instead was the birth of the most ruthless mindset the sport had ever seen. It happened in 1958 on a dusty California strip where the guardrails were crooked. The track prep was done with a broom and a bucket of oil absorbent, and the cars were homemade monsters, built by kids who had more guts than money. Snake was barely a teenager, a rail-thin kid, working nights in a body shop, sleeping 4 hours a night because all he cared about, literally all he thought about, was speed. And that afternoon, somebody made the mistake of handing him the keys to a rail he had no business driving, a spindly, overpowered thing with no real safety equipment, and a blown flathead that shook the ground like a freight train coming off the tracks. Even Snake's buddies told him not to do it. "Man, that thing'll kill you," one said. "You ain't ready for that." Snake didn't argue, he didn't brag, he didn't smile. He just stared at the car like it had spoken directly to him, like it was daring him to grab the wheel and find out what kind of man he was. That stare, cold, locked in, unblinking, would become his trademark. But on that day it terrified people, because no kid should look that calm climbing into something that dangerous. The engine fired with a roar so violent that spectators physically stepped back. The car shook. The headers flashed. The whole machine trembled like it was trying to rip itself apart. And Snake? He didn't flinch. He pulled up to the line, took a breath, and then boom, the flathead let go. The car didn't just break. It exploded. Flames shot up around his legs. The body panels tore loose. Hot oil sprayed across the windshield and into his face. The crowd gasped. A woman screamed. For a full second, everyone thought the kid was dead. But then, out of the smoke, a shape moved. The door swung open. And Don Prudhomme climbed out calm, upright, eyes cold as stone, legs covered in burns, hair singed, face blackened by smoke. A few onlookers ran toward him, shouting, "Kid, are you hurt? Sit down! Sit down!" Snake didn't sit. He didn't wobble. He didn't even look shaken. Instead, he looked back at the burning wreck and said the 6 words that would define the rest of his life. "I should have launched harder than that." Nobody knew what to say. Because they weren't looking at a kid anymore. They were looking at something else, something harder, something colder, something forged in heat and violence and unshakable obsession. Later that night, someone tried to lecture him, told him he needed to think about safety, told him he should be grateful to be alive. Snake just shrugged. "Cars blow up," he said. "So you build 'em better." That sentence, simple, emotionless, became the center of his entire career. While other racers feared explosions, Snake expected them. While others hesitated when engines screamed too loud or shook too violently, Snake leaned in. While others drove with adrenaline, he drove with calculation. And as the legend of that explosion spread across California tracks, something strange happened. Older racers started watching him differently. Promoters stopped seeing a kid and started seeing a draw. And another young racer, a loud one, a smiling one, a talker, started paying attention too. Tom, the Mongoose, McEwen. He didn't fear Snake. He didn't avoid him. He didn't try to intimidate him. Instead, he saw something nobody else saw, an opportunity. Because where Snake was silent, Mongoose was loud. Where Snake was deadly serious, Mongoose was playful. Where Snake terrified crowds, Mongoose entertained them. And for the first time in drag racing history, the perfect rivalry was forming, not between enemies, but between 2 men who understood the same truth. Drag racing didn't need speed to survive. It needed stars. But that was still years away. For now, Snake was staring at a burned wreck while a fire crew hosed it down. And all he could think, truly, honestly think, was how fast the next car was going to be. Because fear might have touched him that day, but it never stayed. Long before television cameras lined the fences, long before corporate sponsors wrapped cars in chrome, vinyl, and million-dollar deals, drag racing lived in the wild backroad airstrips, outlaw quarter miles, places where the lights flickered, the timing clocks broke twice a night, and every run felt like it could be your last. And it was on one of those outlaw tracks that Don, the Snake Prudhomme, stopped being just a fast kid and became something older racers whispered about for years afterward. Not a driver, not a prodigy, but a machine wearing human skin. It happened in Bakersfield, 1962, long before funny cars ruled the world. Back when top fuel dragsters were nothing more than stretched-out death traps, nitro bombs with wheels, frames so thin you could flex them with your hands, engines so wild they shook bolts loose if you stared at them wrong. Snake had been getting quicker every week. Quicker than he should have been. Quicker than the veterans liked. They didn't trust someone that young, that calm, that impossibly fast. Whenever he rolled into the pits, older racers muttered the same line under their breath. Kid doesn't know danger yet. They were wrong. Snake knew danger. He just didn't respect it. That night, the air in Bakersfield felt electric, cool desert wind. The smell of nitro so strong it burned your eyes. And a crowd packed shoulder to shoulder along the guardrail because everyone had heard the rumors. The kid in the red rail, the quiet one, the one who doesn't blink. He's running numbers nobody's supposed to run. His opponent that night was an older, heavier, more experienced driver, someone who'd been winning races since Snake was in junior high. People said it wouldn't even be close. But Snake didn't hear them, or didn't care. He was already strapped in, staring down the quarter mile like he was staring down an enemy. When the engines fired, the entire ground vibrated. Raw nitro thunder, flames licking inches from their faces, people covering their ears as the sound blasted through their bones. Snake's dragster shook, rattled, snarled, but he didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't blink. He waited, like a predator waiting for the prey to make the wrong move. The starter dropped his arm. The older racer launched clean. Snake launched violent. The rail didn't just move, it leaped. The front tires dangled in the air, the chassis flexing like a bow pulled past breaking point. Spectators gasped. Someone yelled, "He's gonna lose it!" But something insane happened. Snake didn't lift, didn't swerve, didn't correct the wheel like normal humans do. He held it wide open while the dragster clawed its way back to the ground, fighting the engine, fighting physics, fighting the thin line between control and catastrophe. Half-track, the older racer was still ahead, but that didn't matter, because Snake's engine suddenly came alive in a way nobody had ever heard before. One long, screaming, perfect note of nitro-fueled fury. The car surged. People on the guardrail felt the shockwave as he blew past. At the stripe, he didn't just win, he obliterated the run. A number flashed on the board that shouldn't have been possible for a driver his age. The crowd went silent. Then the cheers hit like an explosion. But Snake wasn't celebrating. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even breathing hard. When he stepped out of the car, someone ran up and shouted, "Man, you almost lost it!" Snake just wiped the oil from his visor and said in that flat, emotionless voice, "Almost doesn't matter." That line became legend. Mechanics repeated it. Fans quoted it. Opponents hated it. And Tom, the Mongoose McEwen, watching from the fence line that night, felt something he hadn't expected. Respect, mixed with fear, mixed with opportunity, because McEwen understood what others didn't. Snake didn't race like a man. He raced like inevitability. And if drag racing was going to survive the brutal early years, if it needed heroes, or villains, or showmen, then maybe, just maybe, it needed someone exactly like him. It needed the Snake. By the time the sun rose over Lyon's drag strip the next morning, the legend of Snake's Bakersfield run was already spreading like wildfire, passed from pit to pit, racer to racer, whispered over coffee, repeated with disbelief, exaggerated, twisted, retold, reshaped, but always ending the same way. That kid doesn't race like the rest of us. He races like he's got nothing to lose. Tom, the Mongoose McEwen, heard every version of the story. None of them surprised him. He'd watched that run with his own eyes. He'd seen Snake yank a dragster back from the edge of violent disaster and turn it into a victory like it was just another day at the office. And McEwen knew something about the sport most people didn't. Raw speed didn't guarantee greatness. Fearlessness didn't guarantee greatness. Even talent didn't guarantee greatness. What did? Understanding the crowd. Understanding business. Understanding that drag racing was only half about performance and half about perception. And in that moment, while the pits buzzed and racers debated, and Snake quietly tuned his engine without reacting to any of the noise, McEwen saw the truth. If drag racing was a kingdom, then Snake was going to be the warrior who conquered it. But kingdoms don't survive on warriors alone. They need storytellers. They need rivalries. They need spectacle. They need a villain, a hero, a feud. Something fans could argue about, cheer for, bet on, wear on their t-shirts. Snake didn't care about any of that. But McEwen? He understood it better than anyone alive. He walked through the pits that morning with a half smile on his face, shaking hands, listening to rumors, watching fans swarm toward Snake's pit like bees toward a fuel pump dripping nitro. And all McEwen could think was, he has no idea how powerful he could be with the right story behind him. McEwen found Snake leaning over his dragster, wiping down the manifold, checking the plugs calm, quiet, focused, like nothing special had happened the night before. "You know," McEwen said, leaning on the roll cage, "you scared the hell out of half the guys here." Snake didn't look up. "Other half? They're scared of what you're gonna do next." Snake kept working. No reaction, no smile, no ego, just, "Car wasn't perfect." McEwen laughed. "You ran a number that made 3 grown men cuss so loud their wives left the stands." Snake shrugged. "Still wasn't perfect." And right then, McEwen realized something crucial. Snake wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't chasing fans. He wasn't chasing business. He was chasing perfection. And perfection is the most dangerous opponent you'll ever meet, because it never gets tired, never settles, never feels satisfied. McEwen stepped closer. "Listen, Snake, you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to be the greatest driver this sport's ever seen." Snake finally looked up, sharp eyes, emotionless, like he was analyzing McEwen the same way he analyzed spark plugs. "Is that what you want?" McEwen shook his head. "Not what I want, what the sport needs." Snake wiped oil from his fingers. "Drag racing needs faster cars?" "No," McEwen said, tapping the body panel with one finger. "Drag racing needs a show." That was the first spark, the first misunderstanding between two men who would spend the next 20 years shaping the sport in ways nobody could have predicted. Snake thought McEwen was a smooth talker trying to distract him. McEwen thought Snake was a genius too stubborn to see the bigger picture. But both men realized something in that conversation: they needed each other. Snake needed a rival with a mouth, a rival with charisma, a rival who could hype a crowd. And McEwen needed someone so terrifyingly fast that the rivalry would feel real, dangerous, inevitable. Later that day, as fans pressed photos against the chain-link fence asking for signatures, McEwen and Snake ended up side by side in staging lanes, two drivers who couldn't be more different, sitting in cars that sounded like warplanes, shaking themselves loose from gravity. McEwen looked over at Snake, helmet on, gloves tight, eyes locked straight ahead. No nerves, no expression, pure focus. "Let's give him a show," McEwen yelled over the engines. Snake didn't react, didn't nod, didn't even look over. He just rolled forward into the beams. And in that moment, McEwen understood exactly what he was dealing with. A man who wasn't racing him, but racing the limit of mechanical possibility itself. But that only made the idea stronger. The rivalry wouldn't just be two drivers. It would be two philosophies colliding at 240 miles per hour. Snake, the silent assassin. McEwen, the master promoter. One hunted perfection. The other hunted attention. Together, they could save the entire sport. The lights came down, engines screamed, tires howled. The world went white with nitro flame and smoke. And as they blasted down the quarter-mile side by side, fans weren't watching a race. They were watching the start of something drag racing had never seen before. A rivalry big enough to change everything. The morning after their side-by-side run, the pits were buzzing in a way McEwen had never seen before, and he'd been around long enough to know the difference between gossip and momentum. This wasn't gossip. This was a spark, a shift, a turning of the tide that every old-timer could feel in their bones. Something had changed. Fans weren't asking who ran the quickest time. They weren't asking whose tune-up was better. They weren't asking who had the lighter chassis or the hotter cam. They were asking one question over and over again. When are Snake and Mongoose running again? And right there, McEwen understood something that nobody else in drag racing had seen yet. He saw what the sport could become. Not just a proving ground, not just a competition, but a show, a spectacle, a rivalry with names that kids would shout while pretending to race on their bicycles, a rivalry with faces that dads would point at on posters in their garage, a rivalry so big it could pull the sport out of the shadows and into American living rooms. Drag racing didn't need another fast driver. It needed characters. It needed a storyline. It needed heroes and villains. And Snake and Mongoose? They were perfect. Opposites in every possible way, so different that even people who didn't understand engines could understand them. Snake, silent, deadly, clinical. Mongoose, loud, clever, unpredictable. Snake, the executioner. Mongoose, the entertainer. That contrast wasn't just interesting, it was marketable. And so while most racers spent that morning wrenching on carbs and checking oil, McEwen spent it walking the pits, talking, listening, calculating. He noticed the way kids clung to the fence when Snake walked past, staring at him like he was Superman. He noticed the way older fans gravitated toward him, wanting stories, laughs, personality. He noticed the way photographers, real photographers, newspapermen followed them both like they were documenting something that mattered. And in McEwen's head, the idea kept growing. This rivalry could save drag racing because the sport wasn't in great shape. Tracks were closing. Insurance rates were rising. Sponsors didn't understand the value. The public thought drag racing was just a noisy, dangerous hobby. But Snake and Mongoose? They could fix that. If only McEwen could get Snake to understand what he already saw so clearly. That afternoon, while Snake was studying data on his spark plugs, quiet, focused, almost annoyed McEwen was even standing there, Tom finally said it. "Snake, we need to take this rivalry on the road." Snake didn't look up. "I'm busy." "No, listen, this isn't just about racing. It's bigger than that." Snake wiped his hands, slowly turning to face him. "Bigger how?" McEwen took a deep breath. "Sponsors are looking for something to put their name on. Something America will talk about. Something that feels like more than a race. And you and me? We could give them that. We could make match racing bigger than NHRA nationals." Snake raised one eyebrow. "You think people want to see us run each other over and over?" "They already do," McEwen said. "They're talking about us, Snake. Not the times, not the numbers. Us. They want to see you as the ice-cold killer. They want to see me as the loudmouth trying to take you down. That's a rivalry people pay to watch." Snake didn't say a word. He just stared long enough that McEwen wondered if he'd pushed too far, until finally Snake said, "I race to win, Tom, not to talk." McEwen stepped closer. "Exactly. And I talk to win the things you can't win on the track. Money, fans, attention, tickets, sponsorships. You bring the speed, I bring the show. Together, we change the sport." Snake didn't agree, but he didn't walk away either, and that was enough. A week later, the first phone call came. A men's clothing company wanted Snake and Mongoose to appear together in a print ad. Then, a magazine wanted a joint interview. Then a toy company reached out asking if they'd pose next to a pair of miniature dragsters. McEwen handled the conversations with the smooth confidence of a man who had been waiting for this moment his whole life. Snake handled them with the polite disinterest of a man who'd rather be rebuilding a fuel pump. But sponsors didn't care. They saw something the sport had never given them before. Two marketable stars. And then came the meeting that changed everything. A toy executive leaned back in his chair, stared across the table at Snake and Mongoose, and said, "We want to build two cars. Your cars. Your names. Your rivalry. But scaled for kids. Kids will buy them. Fathers will recognize them. And every child in America will know who you two are." Snake blinked. Mongoose grinned. And right there, inside a plain corporate conference room in the middle of California, the future of drag racing was rewritten. Because for the first time in the sport's history, someone outside of racing understood what McEwen had known all along. Snake versus Mongoose wasn't just fast, it was magnetic, it was sellable, it was legendary. When the deal with the toy company started moving forward, Tom McEwen felt something he hadn't felt since he was a kid, standing on the outside of the drag strip fence, pure electric possibility. It didn't matter that he was nearly broke. It didn't matter that his cars were running on borrowed parts and late-night miracles. None of that mattered, because for the first time in drag racing history, two drivers, not engines, not ET slips, not manufacturers, were about to become the product, not by accident, not by luck, but because McEwen had seen something nobody else saw, and now Mattel, the biggest toy company in America, saw it too. The first meeting with Mattel brass was surreal. Snake showed up clean-cut and calm, wearing a crisp shirt and looking like he had wandered into the wrong room. Mongoose showed up wearing sunglasses indoors, smiling like he already owned the place. And across the table sat corporate men in suits who had never smelled nitro in their lives, flipping through photos of Firebird-bodied funny cars like they were studying exotic animals. One executive tapped a picture of Snake's bright yellow Hot Wheels funny car. "This one," he said. "It looks fast even when it's sitting still." Then he tapped Mongoose's red and white car. "And this one looks mean." McEwen leaned forward, and together, he said, "they tell a story." That was all the executives needed. They didn't care that Snake had more wins. They didn't care that McEwen hadn't dominated the national events. They didn't care about torque curves, trap speeds, supercharger overdrive, any of that. They cared about the rivalry, the contrast, the idea that kids everywhere could choose a side Team Snake or Team Mongoose and replay the matchups in their living rooms, on their bedroom floors, on orange plastic tracks that looped and twisted like fantasy drag strips. Snake wasn't fully sold yet. He respected the business opportunity, sure, but he still believed winning races was the soul of the sport. McEwen already knew the truth. Winning fans was how you kept the soul alive. Mattel didn't just want to make toy cars. They wanted posters, commercials, licensing deals, a full line of merchandise. And they wanted Snake and Mongoose to take part in an official match race tour, a traveling spectacle where the rivalry wasn't just present, it was the headline. Snake frowned when they said it. "We're racers, not actors." McEwen clapped his shoulder. "Then we'll race, and let the cameras do their job." And just like that, the deal was sealed. What happened next was unlike anything the sport had ever seen. When Mattel released the first commercial two kids racing Hot Wheels versions of Snake and Mongoose, the sales numbers didn't just rise, they detonated. Suddenly, the biggest drag racing rivalry in the world was happening not just at Indy or Englishtown or Orange County, but in millions of homes across America. Kids weren't asking for baseball bats or action figures. They were asking for funny cars, Snake funny cars, Mongoose funny cars. And the moment it hit the drag strip, everything exploded. Fans who had never attended a race showed up in shirts with cartoon snakes and cartoon mongooses. Kids held die-cast versions in the stands, mimicking burnout motions with their tiny hands. But the real shockwave came for the promoters, because suddenly, whenever the posters arrived advertising Snake vs. Mongoose Match Race Official Hot Wheels Tour, tickets sold out days in advance. Not hours, days. At one event, the promoter walked up to McEwen with wide eyes. "Tom," he said, "we've never seen anything like this. We're turning people away at the gate. The parking lot's full. The bathrooms are full. Hell, even the hot dog stand is sold out. This isn't a race, it's a circus." McEwen grinned. That's the point. Snake, standing beside him with folded arms, couldn't deny it anymore. He was the better driver. He always would be. But McEwen was the one who understood how to turn a rivalry into a phenomenon. And the phenomenon was just getting started. Because the more famous Snake and Mongoose became, The more the stakes grew, the more crowds cheered, the more sponsors paid attention, the more drag racing itself transformed from a niche competition into a national entertainment force. Yet behind all the cameras and sold-out shows, behind all the smiling kids and roaring crowds, something deeper was happening. Something even McEwen didn't fully understand at first. Snake and Mongoose were no longer just drivers. They were symbols. Snake was precision, focus, ruthless pursuit of victory. Mongoose was creativity, heart, the hustler who wouldn't quit. America needed both. America loved both. And together, they weren't just saving drag racing, they were reshaping it. The night everything changed for Snake and Mongoose and drag racing itself. The first official Snake versus Mongoose Hot Wheels match race wasn't supposed to be historic. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a well-promoted booking 2 funny cars, 2 rivals, 2 payout checks, and a crowd expecting a good show. But the night it happened? The night both men rolled their cars toward the staging lanes and saw what was happening beyond the guardrail? That was the night they realized drag racing had just stepped into a new era. Because the fans weren't sitting in their seats. They were crowding the fences, climbing onto trailers, packing the bleachers shoulder to shoulder until you could barely see the concrete. Grown men who'd been going to drag races since the days of flatheads were standing on picnic coolers just to catch a glimpse of the 2 brightly painted funny cars idling toward the starting line. Kids were on their father's shoulders holding up die-cast Snake and Mongoose cars like talismans, waving them in the air as if the real cars were superheroes. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, you heard the same chant rising over the PA system. Snake, Mongoose, Snake, Mongoose. It didn't matter who you were rooting for. It mattered that you were part of the noise. Tom McEwen stepped out of his hauler and froze. He had seen big crowds before, sure, but not like this. Not crowds who came specifically for him. Not crowds who cared more about the drivers than the elapsed times. He leaned against his car, helmet in hand, and whispered to himself, "Holy hell, we did it." Down the lane, Snake slotted into his own pre-race routine, calm, steady, the posture of a man who had spent years perfecting the craft. But even he couldn't ignore the shaking fence, the roar of thousands of fans chanting the names he and McEwen had turned into brands. A track official jogged up next to him. "Don, you hear that?" Snake nodded. "Hard not to. This is the biggest turnout we've had in 10 years, the official added. "You guys, whatever you 2 are doing, don't stop." Snake didn't answer. He simply stared down track, thinking about how weird it all felt, being the center of something bigger than racing, bigger than engines or ET slips or trophy walls, something cultural, something national, and maybe even something historic. When the cars finally rolled into the water box, the crowd erupted so loudly, the track announcer just gave up trying to speak. There was no point. Snake lit his tires first, the yellow Hot Wheels car whipping through a long, violent burnout that left 2 banners of smoke drifting toward the starting line. The fans screamed. Then Mongoose answered with a burnout twice as long, twice as loud, lifting the crowd into a frenzy so intense it felt like the bleachers were shaking. The starter threw up his hands like a referee trying to break up 2 animals. Snake and Mongoose rolled forward, staged, and for a split second, the entire drag strip fell silent, as if thousands of people were holding the exact same breath at the exact same moment Christmas tree flashed. Both cars launched so hard they shook the ground. Flames licked out from the headers, tires bit into the asphalt. The smell of nitro rolled across the stands like a wave. Side by side, inch for inch, they rocketed down the strip. 2 machines built for chaos, 2 men built for pressure, 2 legends in the act of becoming legends. At half-track, Snake pulled ahead by the width of a helmet. At 3/4 track, Mongoose clawed back into striking distance. And at the stripe, just a flash of light, nobody in the stands could tell who had won. The announcer screamed into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, that is drag racing." When the times finally came over the PA system, Snake, by just a few thousandths, the fans didn't boo. didn't complain, didn't argue. They exploded with the kind of energy you only feel when you know you've just witnessed something that will be talked about for decades. But something else happened down at the top end. As the cars slowed and drifted to a stop, as rescue trucks rolled out and dust began settling in the shutdown area, Snake sat in his car breathing hard, hands shaking just a little, not because he had won, because he knew deep in his chest that drag racing had just changed forever. Behind him, Mongoose climbed from his car, pulled off his helmet, and looked back at the grandstands. He didn't see disappointment. He didn't see people upset that he lost. He saw fans, thousands of them, cheering him just as loudly as they cheered Snake. In that moment, he realized something every promoter and every racer needed to understand. This rivalry was no longer about who won the race. It was about the story America wanted to keep watching. McEwen jogged over and bumped Snake's shoulder. "We ain't just racers anymore," he said, smiling through sweat and nitro fumes. "We're the damn show." Snake didn't argue, because for once, Mongoose was right. The morning after that first official Snake vs. Mongoose Hot Wheels showdown, something surreal happened. Something neither man, neither crew, neither promoter, and certainly not Mattel had fully expected. Drag racing fans woke up and kept talking about it. Not the ETs, not the MPH, not the track conditions, not the weather. They talked about the show. At breakfast counters, in greasy diners from California to Ohio, old men in denim jackets slammed their coffee mugs down and said, "Boys, that right there was the greatest drag race I've ever seen." In barbershops, kids held out their new Hot Wheels diecasts, reenacting the race in the laps of men who'd been cutting hair since Eisenhower was president. Across the country, track owners made frantic late-night phone calls to promoters. "Get me Snake and Mongoose. I don't care what it costs. Book 'em." McEwen and Prudhomme hadn't just drawn a crowd. They had created a hunger, a demand, a movement. And within 48 hours, bookings were being made so fast that their managers struggled to keep track. One promoter even sent a telegram that simply read, "Need both cars, will double payout. Name your date." But with the money came scrutiny, a lot of it. The NHRA suddenly found themselves facing a strange new problem. For years, they had been the governing body of the sport, equal parts referee, rulemaker, and parent figure to thousands of racers across America. But now, two men, two friends, two rivals, were pulling more fans to match races than the NHRA pulled at some national events. That scared the suits in Glendora more than any Nitro Fireball ever could. Behind closed doors, NHRA officials paced in quiet meeting rooms, whispering things like, "These exhibition matches are becoming bigger than sanctioned events. We can't have the stars overshadowing the organization. What happens if the momentum shifts away from NHRA entirely?" They wanted control. They needed control. But Snake and Mongoose? They were too busy rewriting the sport to care about politics. Meanwhile, back in the pits at the next appearance, Mongoose leaned on the nose of his Hot Wheels funny car and watched a line of fans stretching longer than anything he'd seen before. Fathers holding their sons by the shoulders, mothers snapping pictures with film cameras, teenagers waving posters, and every single one of them chanting two names, his and Snake's. Mongoose turned to his crew chief and said quietly, almost in disbelief, "When did we become rock stars?" His crew chief shrugged. "When you started giving him something to believe in." Snake, parked a few stalls down, was experiencing the same surreal moment. A boy no older than 10 nervously approached him with a tiny die-cast car. "Mr. Prudhomme, could you sign it?" Snake smiled, not the racer's smile he used in photos, but the real one, the one that came from somewhere deep. He took the car, signed it, and handed it back gently. "Take care of that one," he said. "It's worth more than you know." The kid ran off like he'd just been handed the keys to a spaceship. And as Snake watched him disappear into the crowd, something hit him, something he couldn't ignore anymore. This rivalry wasn't just racing. It was childhood. It was family. it was America. But beneath all the celebration, both men were privately wrestling with a brutal truth. The rivalry was great for the fans, but it was hell on their bodies, their machines, their crews, and their nerves. Because every time they pulled up to the starting line against each other, they weren't just trying to win a drag race, they were trying to live up to the legend the fans believed in. The burnout had to be bigger. The launch had to be harder. The pass had to be straighter, louder, more violent, more spectacular than anything they'd done before. It wasn't enough to be fast anymore. They had to be unforgettable. And on the night of their next booking, just 1 week after the race that changed everything, both men rolled their cars out of the haulers knowing exactly what was at stake. The sun dipped low, the stands overflowed. Hot Wheels banners waved in the warm breeze. The announcer tried to contain the crowd, but couldn't compete with the roar of thousands chanting their names. And when the two funny cars fired up, when the nitro fumes rolled across the track and the ground shook under their feet, the truth finally revealed itself in the cracks between the cheers. This wasn't just a rivalry now. This was the heart of drag racing. And both men, the quiet assassin and the charismatic showman, were about to push themselves harder than they ever had before. The night air at Orange County International Raceway had a weight to it thick with nitro fumes, thick with heat, thick with the kind of electricity that only exists when everyone in the grandstands knows they're about to witness something historic. Snake rolled his Army funny car out of the pits first, the body glistening beneath the floodlights like a polished missile. Mongoose followed behind in his bright red Hot Wheels machine, and when the two cars idled side by side at the head of the staging lanes, the sound didn't feel like engines anymore. It felt like thunder arguing with itself. The announcer barely got a word out before the crowd drowned him. They weren't here for commentary. They weren't here for analysis. They were here for the moment. The moment when two men, two friends, two enemies, two symbols would decide, one more time, who carried the heartbeat of American drag racing. Snake cracked the throttle once. Sharp, clean, violent. The grandstands erupted. Mongoose answered with his own stab of the pedal, louder, angrier, almost taunting. And Snake glanced over with that sideways smirk. Every old-school fan remembers the look that said, "You really want to do this tonight? Fine, let's dance." The burnout was war. Snake lit his tires and disappeared in a storm cloud of smoke so thick you could smell the rubber halfway across the parking lot. Mongoose rolled through a heartbeat later and blasted out a burnout twice as long, flames flickering from his headers as the crowd roared like animals. When the smoke cleared, the track looked like a battlefield. Snake backed up first, smooth, surgical, focused. Mongoose backed up with flair, throwing a little sideways wiggle into the motion just to make the fans scream. And then they staged. Side by side, nose to nose, the cars vibrating like trapped monsters. Snake lowered his visor. Mongoose breathed out slowly. No theatrics now. No cameras. No posters. No Hot Wheels. Just two men who'd built their lives around a quarter mile and the fans who lived inside that war with them. The final yellow blinked. The crowd froze. And then, green. Snake left like he'd been launched from a catapult. The Army car screaming down the strip straight as a rifle shot. Mongoose was right there with him, wheels up for an instant, the chassis flexing under the violence of the launch. At half-track, you couldn't slip a dollar bill between them. Flames ripping from the pipes, parachutes packed tight, the smell of nitro sharp enough to sting your eyes. They weren't racing for time anymore. They were racing for everything the rivalry had become. At 800 feet, Snake nosed ahead by inches. The grandstand shook. Mongoose stabbed the throttle harder, the car wobbling as if daring physics to argue. And in the final 50 feet, those last impossible milliseconds where legends are carved out of men, both drivers found something inside themselves that only drag racers understand. Pain, pride, glory, fear, love. And when they crossed the stripe, the scoreboard didn't even matter. Snake had won by a whisper, but the truth was bigger than the number. Fans weren't cheering for Snake's victory. They were cheering because they knew they had seen the last great duel of an era. At shutdown, both cars rolled to a quiet stop, steam rising from the headers. Snake took off his helmet and wiped his brow. Mongoose climbed out, walked over, and held out his hand. Snake stared at it for a long second, then shook it. The crowd saw it, the flashbulbs caught it, and that handshake became the closing chapter of one of the greatest stories American motorsports has ever known. Because when Snake and Mongoose embraced that night, they weren't rivals anymore, they were brothers who had carried a sport on their backs and delivered it to the next generation. When they returned to the starting line, thousands stood on their feet, not for the race, for the men, for everything they'd given, for everything they'd lost, for everything they'd built together. And as Snake looked out over the crowd, he finally understood the truth. The rivalry hadn't saved drag racing. The love people had for the rivalry had saved it. Drag racing needed heroes. Snake and Mongoose became legends. Their rivalry didn't just fill grandstands, it filled childhoods, dinner tables, toy boxes, and memories that still echo across America today. If you love this ride through history, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because the next legend is waiting in the lanes.